Hello guys, welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to showcase you how to develop REST APIs using Spring Boot and Java. So this will be the first of series of YouTube tutorials that is based on Spring Boot and Java. So for a beginner to understand how REST APIs are developed using Spring Boot, I think this video would be a great help, right? So let's start. So to start with the Spring Boot, I think the easiest way is to generate the project using Spring Initializer, right? So let's go there and let's create a project. So this is going to be a Maven project. You could either choose Gradle or Maven, which is actually a build tool which builds the project together. So and then the language, and I'll go with 2.5.5 Spring Boot, and here you can group as you need, so whatever the package that you need, and then name for the project, and then you have to add the dependencies. So those are the dependencies that you are going to use within this project. So of course, since this is web, we have to import Spring Web, and then I will use Spring JPA, Spring Data JPA, so which we use to map data layer to the service layer. And then here, since I don't want to use an external DB like MySQL or PostgreSQL, I'll be using an in-memory database. So here they have something called HyperSQL. So let's add this one as well. So I think these are pretty much enough for us to start with Spring Boot. Let's generate the project. Right, so the project is generated. Now once you unzip it, there is let me unzip it and show it to you. Once you unzip it, you have this folders created, and then pom.xml is the file that contains all the dependencies. Okay, so and then once you can open this one in your favorite IDE. So I prefer IntelliJ IDEA, and I have already opened the project in this case. Okay, so first of all, I think all we have to do is to add this DB configurations to the application properties file, right? So which is residing in the resource folder. So if you go to the application properties file, you have to specify this the JDBC driver that we use to connect to, and then the URL, and then the username and password, and then DDL auto equals create, which means to create the database when we start the server for this application, right? And then this db close delay equals -1 is also a must that we have to append to the URL, right? Okay, so with this, I think I have already created the project with the project structure as well. So all you get once you initially import the project is this remove application class only, right? And unless you change the port in the application properties file, it will be 8080 default, right? So I'm not going to change it. So if you need, you can add the property like server.port, and you can change the port as well to anything that you need, right? So but I will go with the default port. Okay, so right, so this particular application that I'm going to use is simply injecting a user to the DB and fetching it, deleting, and having a look at how they work, right? So the project structure that I like to use is we have to have controllers, which is the REST layer where we expose endpoints, and then the DTOs are used to transfer data. DTOs means data transfer objects. So from the front end to the REST, and as well as from the REST endpoints to the front end, we use DTOs. And then the models are the classes that directly maps the Java to the database. And then we have a repo layer where we write DB queries, right? And then the service layer where we write all the business logic, right? So to start with, let's start with a simple DTO, right? So let me close this, and don't worry about the code here, because I'll be adding the GitHub repo to this. The same project will be added to GitHub, and then it will be there in the description, right? So okay, so let's start with the DTO. So user detail, so this particular user I am going to insert will contain only three fields: ID, name and the age. And then I have created the all argument constructor, and then the no argument constructor, and then the getters and setters as well. Actually this getters and setters generation, so you can easily generate them by going like that, going into this generate option and then selecting the getters and setters. Or else now there is a library called Lombok which we can use, so that I'm currently not using, so I'll be adding that in a later video, right? So then we'll go to the user class. So this is the class that maps the database into our Java model, right? So this contains the same fields: ID, name and the age. So the only difference is here we have to specify which table that we are connecting to. So we have added this at entity annotation, which is part of this persistence API, and then the table name is also here. So here as well we have generated the constructor, both the all argument constructor and then the zero argument constructor, and then the getters and setters. So I think so far it's clear, just creation of few pojos, right? Then let's go to the repo layer. So this repository actually is coming with it's an interface that we create. It's called user repository, and we extend this one by this CRUD repository class, which is part of this Spring JPA framework, right? And then here we have to pass, since this is user repository, we have to pass the entity, which entity that we are going to use through this repository, and then the primary key of that particular entity, so which is integer, since I have made this one as an integer, right? So this is it. And actually we can write certain methods in the interface, and also as we extend this CRUD repository, there are some methods that we are inheriting from the CRUD repository class, so we'll get to know them later. Then of course and then another thing that we can add here at repository annotation, so which will mark this one as a repository layer, right? And then let's go to the user service. So this is a service layer where we write all the business logic, right? So I name it as user service, and then this at service annotation is added here. So now the flow, how the flow works is from the repository we are calling the service layer, right? So from the controller we are calling the service layer, and then from the service layer we are calling the repository layer. So how do we connect with the repository? So that is called auto wiring. So what we are doing is we create an instance of object of user repository, and we auto wire it. So you don't have to manually go and create objects. So as soon as you auto wire it, it's available for you in the user service area, user service class, right? Okay, so let's go to the controller now. I'll come back to the methods and I'll go through each of them, right? Let's go to the user controller. So this is the controller layer. So to mark this one as a REST endpoint, we have to add this at REST controller annotation, so which tells that this is a REST controller, right? And then this request mapping is what we have to specify in the URL when accessing this endpoint, right? So since this is user controller, I'm adding a prefix like user. So the complete URL would be something like localhost 8080 and then user. So that will direct you to this controller, and then based on the mappings that we specify on top of the methods, it will route to any of the methods that is specified, right? Okay, so again, then the other thing is we have to get the user service, because we are calling the user service here. We can actually call the user repository as well. There is no restriction, but if you want to call, we can edit like that. But as a best practice, we have to try to keep the code separately. So the TB access layer separately, and then the business logic in the service layer, something like that. So I'll remove that one. Okay, so first of all, let's I have added the get mapping, right? So, and when defining REST endpoints, the URL that you specify is key actually. So there are actually, for this particular endpoint, you can type anything. You can type something like get users as well. It would work, but that is not the best way. So since this is user entity, right, and we have specified it here user, so then the user slash would get me all the users. So this is what I am doing here. So get users, and here what I'm doing is I'm returning a list of user DTO. So instead of returning complete user object, I'm returning a user DTO. There's a reason behind that. So actually say now in a large application there may be a case where you have to change the DB, or where you have to change your entity classes, but that doesn't necessarily need to reflect in the front end. Okay, so in that case this will be very valuable, because even you can make changes to your user entity class, but it doesn't make any change to the user DTO, right? So that advantage is there. Okay, and then now what we are doing is we are calling this user service with a method get all users, and we are getting a user list, and then just populating. This is simple Java, so you are iterating through the list and populating a user DTO list and then returning it, right? So let me go to this get all users method as well, just to show you how we do that. So here what you are doing is user repository, and one thing I want to show is now user repository, when you press dot you get lots of methods. So those are the methods that is inherited from the CRUD repository class, right? So save, for saving instance, find all, find by id, find all by id. So there are lots of methods that you can use, right? So here in this case I am using the find all method and iterating it and appending it to the user list, right, and returning the user list. So that's pretty much the flow through it. So let me take you to the other methods as well. Now this is actually get mapping with slash, so it would give us all the users, but in this case it would be like we are getting a user based on a particular ID. So there we are passing this ID as a path parameter, right? So this is how we have to specify path parameters, and then here in the method argument we have to pass, this is a path variable and it's going to be a string 1 ID. So then we have to fetch this particular user by ID, right? So here in the user service I have written a small method to get user by ID. Let's go and see what we do there, right? Okay, we pass this user ID here, right? So I'm actually passing a int ID here. Let me go to the controller again, show you what I do. Yeah, so this is string ID, I am converting it to integer and passing it, right, to the service layer, right? And then I get the user ID, so I find the user by ID, and then since this is returning an optional in Java, so I have the luxury to use this OS throw and then throw an exception if this user object is not found. So if it is not found, that will be returned, right? So you don't have to handle the null pointers or anything like that when you are using this optional. So you can, if it is null, then of course this error will be thrown, right? Otherwise it will return a user object. So that object will be passed to the user controller and it will throw, right? Then the save user method. Okay, then again this is a post mapping. Now previously what I was using is a get mapping. So when you are making the request from the front end application, it has to be an HTTP get if you are calling this particular method, right? But if you want to call a post, if you want to inject some data, insert some data, it has to be a post request, HTTP post, right? For the HTTP post, it contains a request body, so that is what we are getting it. So the request body, so and I am expecting a user DTO type JSON object from the front end. So and then what I do is I am directly passing this user DTO to save user method. So let's go and see what I'm doing inside this method. Okay, so I'm in the user repository, I'm just calling this save method and passing a user object. So I cannot pass the user DTO, I have to pass the user object. So I'm using the user the all argument constructor in the user class and passing all the parameters and saving them. So this would save the user in the DB, and then yeah, this is the update. For updating, for this is for the creation. The post mapping we use mainly for the creations, and we use the put mapping so to update. right? So for the update, the standard way that we follow is we pass the id of the object that we want to update as a path variable, and then the rest of the parameters or rest of the fields that we want to update as the request body. So that's what we are doing here. So at path variable we are passing this string id, and as the request body we are passing a user DTO, right? So what we do is, first we pass this id and get this user object from the DB, and then we set the relevant values from the user DTO object that the front end passes to us, right? And then simply call in the save user method with the user object that would save us the user. And as it returns a new object, I am converting it to a user DTO and returning the saved object as well with the new values, right? So I don't think there's nothing new here, so it's calling the same method to get the user, right? And calling the save user method, I think it's again the same. So it accepts a user object and simply saves the user, right? So here I have overridden this save user method, one accepting user D2 and the other one is accepting a simple user entity itself, right? Okay, so now we have covered the get mapping, post mapping and the put mapping as well, and then going to the delete mapping. So the delete mapping, we have this annotation at delete mapping, and then again we are passing the id of the object that we want to delete as the path variable, right? So again then we go to user service delete user method, and here again we have this user repository dot delete by id method. So here we have the delete, either we can pass the complete object or we can delete it by the id. We can pass the primary key and it will delete the object for us, right? Okay, I think that's pretty much it from the code itself. Let's run this application and test it out. So yeah, so as you restart the server, it will create a fresh database each time because this is an in-memory database, right? So let me start. You can run the demo application, so which is this class. Actually you can run it from here as well. Run the demo application, which will start the server for us. Okay, so let's give it a go. Now the URL is going to be 8080 slash users. Okay, it returns an empty array, right? So because we don't have any users at the moment, and even though we test this get request via the browser, we cannot test post request. So let's use Postman for that one. So to save some time, I have already added some the requests are there. So let's run this here. Okay, here it shows now I'm sending a get request. This is a get request to this user endpoint and I'm getting nothing, right? Then in the post request, let's try to now make it as the type as post, and then it's the same URL that we are using, localhost 8080 slash user, and then as the request body I am passing this JSON. So this JSON actually for the post method, if you go back to the code and if you go to the controller, you will see, yeah, so this one is accepting a user DTO. So what does user DTO contains? It contains ID, name and age. So that's what we are passing here, ID, name and age. So we have set values and then let's send it. Okay, and it returns me the same object. Now let's go back to our get request and let's run it. Yeah, we have the object saved in the DB, right? So let's add another object. Let's change this to 2. Okay, and then add set into 7, right? And send it. Okay, I got the object. Let's see whether we have saved it successfully. Okay, we have 2 objects now. Let me add another one quickly. Okay, this is 2, right? Send it. Let's go back to get request and check. Okay, we have all 3 objects saved now in the DB, right? Okay, now let's go to the other get method. Now I have saved few objects. Let's see, the id contains 1, 2 and 3. I want to get the user by id 2 or 3. Let's type 3 here, right? So this is again a get request where we don't have to pass any request bodies, and then just click send. That would return us the object with id 3, right? And then the put object. So now I want to update a particular object. So let's say I want to update the first one. So I think the first one, let's add as the name, and then the age to 55, and then now we are updating the first object. The name is going to be fewxs, and then the age is going to be 55. Let's update. Okay, it returns me the updated object id, this one, name. So let's do a get request now, the full get request, and see if it is successful. Yeah, we have updated it correctly, right? So then finally the delete statement. So now we are going to delete one record from the db, right? So let's delete the okay, let's delete the first one. So this is a delete. HTTP method is going to be delete in this case, because we said it's going to be a delete mapping. Yeah, since this is a delete mapping. And then yeah, let's delete the first one. So then once you delete it, yeah, it says delete success, right? And then let's go here and try this one. Okay, here we have only 2 objects now. So I think this covers the basic functionality where you do CRUD operations using Spring Boot. And then I think some things that you have to worry about is these URLs. You have to use the approved way of using URLs, right? So you can type anything and even that works, right? So but that is not the approved way, accepted way, right? So just follow that. I think yeah, that's pretty much it. So one more thing that I want to show is the POM XML. So all the dependencies that we added during this creation of the project are listed here as dependencies. So this Spring Boot starter, and then HSQL DB, and then the Spring Boot starter web, and then the data JPA. So those are the dependencies that we added. So those are listed. If in case if you need to add a new dependency later, you can always come here and add a new dependency here, right? So then just specify what version and what exactly you need to add as a dependency, right? Okay, I think that concludes this video. So if you like it, please hit the subscribe button, and please comment below what you think of the video, since this is my first video, and let me know what exactly you need to know in the future as well, right? Okay, and let's see you soon. Bye bye.